بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وحبيبنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وبعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, listeners. Welcome to episode 4 of Ibn Battuta's Boat. Ibn Battuta's Boat is an up-and-coming podcast that aims to address issues of living in the West and picking up on intellectual topics of that nature. So today we focused on an interesting topic, ISOC representation, understanding what activism was all about, and what are the challenges and limitations that come with that. We were joined by our esteemed guest, Abdus Samad, who's currently a student studying medicine at King's College London. During his studies, he has empowered the Muslim community by being president of his Islamic Society. And furthermore, he has recently graduated from the Sabeel cycle, a tarbiyyah development program in the UK. So he had a lot of insights and take-home messages. And whilst the episode perhaps focused on various elements of obviously his experience, we tried to round it up as much as we could.
Definitely. Alhamdulillah, I thought it was quite a beneficial episode, and the kind of things that the listeners can actually take away from this episode once you listen to it can be, how involved should we as Muslims be getting in kind of activism within our society? Where is the kind of lines to draw with it, and what to look out for in terms of pitfalls? But also, how can we positively influence this society and actually further the cause of the Muslims, inshallah, and especially through kind of the ISOC scene and student activism, and where that actually takes us forward into kind of bigger activism and bigger organizations. So with that being said, make sure that you're following us on social media so you get to know more about Ibn Battuta's Boat. You're keeping up with the podcast episodes. We've got a YouTube channel now, which obviously you can see all of this visually. That's Ibn Battuta's Boat. We have Facebook, Instagram, SoundCloud, Twitter, all of the same, Ibn Battuta's Boat. So make sure you join the boat. And with that being said, let's get started with the episode. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, as-salatu was-salamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Joined by Muhammad, Abdus Samad. Here at Ibn Battuta's Boat. What is this, like 4th episode now? MashaAllah, MashaAllah, tabarakallah. So we're going to go straight into it. We've got Abdus Samad here. And you would have heard from the intro already what he's about, what he's doing. So really, this is just the icebreaker now, yeah? So we want to go into the discussion about student activities, ISOCs, activism, Muslim activism, all these kind of student politics, these kind of labels. We want to try and expose all of this because we already know, myself, I was involved in ISOCs and I'm still involved in activism. Yourself, you're in that space. And obviously our guest speaker, mashallah, Abdus Samad, you've done quite a lot in that space as well. So I think just to start it off, what are the kind of top 3 things that you have learned or that you've seen, or top 3 moments even, that you can take away from your time being, you were ISOC president of King's, mashallah, and any other positions that you may have had before you became president, or you're volunteering in any other sort of student activist organizations other than ISOC, with kind of top 3 things you would take away from that?
Sure. So I think the first thing would be the importance of fellowship. A lot of the time there's so much talk about leadership, how the Ummah needs leaders, how the Ummah needs this, that, the other. And everyone's almost trying their best to become a leader. Yeah. And there's almost, I think, like an undertone of, I don't want the position, but I do. If you know what I mean.
Yes.
And I think we sometimes...
It's kind of that thing like fake humbleness.
Yeah, almost like a fake humbleness type thing.
Okay.
And I think it's actually very important to realize the importance of being a follower.
Okay.
That it's not always about being the leader. It's not always about being at the top. It's about you doing your role, whatever that role is and whatever is required, if that makes sense.
So why not push everybody to be a leader?
Firstly, because not everyone can. That's one thing that I learnt from the various projects that I've been involved in, that not everyone is a leader. And sometimes when you put a person in that position, it actually creates a lot of damage for that person and for others as well. And the other thing is that, to be honest, it's quite damaging to a person's intentions. Like if a person is wanting to be on the top, if a person wants to kind of be the person that everyone listens to, and they didn't go through that process of volunteering, of being the guy who would pack up the chairs and being the guy who would get the refreshments. And still, I think, even as a leader, it's very important for you to be that guy somewhere.
Okay.
It's very important, even whilst you're in a leadership position.
Okay.
That you shouldn't, for example, be the type of leader where all of the brothers are eating, so you eat first.
Yes.
You shouldn't have that sort of attitude. And even outside of that domain where you're the leader, there should be other places where you're a follower. Just to keep yourself humble, keep your feet on the ground. Especially young people like us, it's very easy for us to inflate our egos and think that we're more than we are. Even like some of the questions on this kind of podcast, I'm probably the wrong person to comment on them, but unfortunately I'm one of those guys who has an opinion on everything.
That's why we wanted you here.
So I'll still
But I
share
think
it.
that's proper interesting, the whole thing about followership, because it's something that I think that I've also seen, and I would put it in my top 3 as well, is followership. Because once I kind of experienced the whole leadership thing in ISOC, then I realized how important it is for followership. Because when you're a leader and you don't have people doing their tasks that you've set out for them to do, you realize how frustrating it is, and not just frustrating for yourself, but the kind of knock-on effect it can have to the rest of the project, right? So you know that when you go into a project and you have to be underneath somebody, you already know how it feels like to that person. So you have that understanding, okay, there has to be followership. And now I see it. So when I'm like, for example, with my little cousins or something, and like they're doing something, or their parents have told them to do something, or they have to do something together, right? I see this in them, that they don't like to do that, be the person that has been told you need to do this and stick to that. And I know if I was their age, like 15, 16, I would have felt like that. But now that I've been through that experience, I can see that, okay, you know, I can see that, no, actually you should be doing your role, and you should be doing what you were told to do in that way. And you're right about how it keeps you humble as well, subhanAllah, because I've noticed, like, in other projects I've been into after ISOC, that I've been like maybe second, third in command or something in the hierarchy, whatever, it does give you that humbleness that, okay, I came from a position of leading people, now I'm something even bigger. Yeah, I'm not really the big man. I should be doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Exactly.
And what I'm told to
Exactly.
be doing. Yeah.
And I think the other perspective is, from just on that followership point, is that you, as being a follower in the past, you have a degree of tolerance, I think, and understanding when someone fails. Because you've done it in the past. And so you're like, okay, fine, you didn't make the beating, but remember that time, Abdus Samad, that you didn't make the meeting? Or that time that you went in?
There's some sort of mercy there.
because you're like, okay, because if you go straight into the leadership position, you're thinking, I'm in charge, you're going to listen to me and so on. But when you've had the experience that you've actually sometimes messed up, and obviously you apologize to the brother that I'm sorry I messed up and so on and so forth, but you kind of have that degree of understanding. And that would probably be my second thing, just understanding, taghaful, overlooking other people's mistakes, recognizing that not everyone's you.
Okay.
Wallahi, this is probably one of the biggest things that I learned. That obviously, like, you don't really think anything of yourself. And so you almost think that everyone's just the same, that the things that I'm able to do, everyone else is able to do.
You're going to give an example of that? Has there been a time where that's really had an effect?
I think it's more just general, it's more like a general thing, like just in terms of dealing with things and dealing with pressure and all of these sorts of things. Personally, the way I am as an individual, I can deal with quite a lot of pressure at the same time. And so you almost expect everyone else to be able to do it. And then when like a testing time comes and you realize that, oh, subhanallah, they're actually really struggling. Being kind of there and understanding that you might have that strength, but they don't. And that's the beauty of a team. That a team, in its essence, is a bunch of people coming together to cover each other's shortcomings. And your shortcomings are covered by that person, and your shortcomings, inshallah, are covered by me. And that kind of attitude, I think, is very important. And part of that, for you to really build a good team, is for you to overlook the shortcomings. And sometimes even pretend they don't exist, as if you've never noticed. Because it maintains the izzah of your team members. They feel like they're being respected, they feel like they're being honoured. And at the best time, then you highlight it in the best of ways. And I've noticed almost like two extremes within the uni scene. There are those who just take, and like as in they're being misused, they're being mistreated and so on and so forth, and they're just doing it, and they're not really saying anything. And then there's the other extreme where someone's done something wrong and you're immediately jumping at his neck.
On them.
And those are the
Yeah.
two extremes, aren't they?
Yeah, those are kind of like the two extremes.
And that do you say those extremes are very common in like
very
university
common,
scene?
very common. Like even in some large organizations, public muhasaba and so on and so forth, where the attitude is we're going to tear him apart, or we're going to destroy this person.
To build them up.
Yeah, it's not even to build them up. It's just more like because they did this the entire year, we bottled it up. Now we're going to.
What's the middle ground then?
I think the middle ground is number one for you to recognize that they're ibadullah, that you're all here, you're all slaves of Allah, you all want the best for each other, and to have that nusr. Ad-dinu nasiha, qulna liman, isn't it?
And also the point,
religion is
وَخُلِقَ
nasiha.
الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا.
Exactly.
That's the main thing you need to understand. It's not just yourself that's created weak. Everyone else.
Everyone. And the forms of da'f, the forms of weakness differ from person to person, which is why we have to come together. And that's why fellowship is so important again, because if you're not coming together and you don't realize that you have shortcomings, you have weaknesses, and you're just trying to do your own thing, you're always trying to be the leader, you're always trying to be a maverick, then in all honesty, you'll have very, very little impact.
Do you think that these 2 points, or we'll move on to the third one, but you think these 2 points have come from sort of just purely experience from being in these kind of scenes, or do you think it's been more kind of, it's something that you've noticed in your elders or it's been relayed to you from like in terms of tarbiyyah, anything like that? Or is it a mixture?
It's a mixture. It's a mixture. So for me personally, being involved with various projects since probably like 17, 18, from college age, I was involved in ISOC and various da'wah initiatives in and around Whitechapel. And that kind of attitude of listening to your Ameer was just intrinsic. Like if they tell you to do something, you do it. It was kind of like, it was kind of a given. And then going to university, it's nothing like that. It's nothing like that.
Do you think it was quite frustrating then? Because if you were so used to it before, you expected it, right?
For the first year when I was in university, so I've been in university for now 4, 5, I'm going on to my 5th year.
MashaAllah.
And so it's
and
been...
How many years do you have left after that?
Don't.
That's it.
You're going to be an old man by the time you're done with education.
I'm going to be walking out with a walking stick. But from when I first came in, it was just a shock to the system. Like, the Ameer said something, why aren't we all listening? I remember one of my friends actually, when we were on a mountain climb, and there was like a bit of a disagreement, and he came from a similar background where he was involved in activism and so on and so forth from a young age, and it was very kind of sami'na wa ta'ana, that sort of kind of attitude. He was like, the Ameer said this, khalas. Why are you guys going the other way? And he went with the Ameer, and the rest of the brothers were just kind of doing their own thing. And I think it comes from a recognition that you might think you're Ameer, but not everyone does. And so, it's khair. In the end of the day, ISOC and these sorts of things are just societies, university societies, I think sometimes.
How would you, I mean, like you just said, it's just the ISOC and it's just students, right? But then how do you build that in them to understand that there is still a level of Ameership and fellowship?
I think you just got to change your approach. For me personally, if, for example, someone doesn't want to do something, I won't force them. I would say, fine, I'll do it. And usually when I say I'll do it, they'll be like, oh, no, I'll do it. It's not mind games, though.
Yeah.
If they actually weren't to do it, I just do it. I just do it. It's not that deep. I mean, for you to move the plates or something like that, it's not a big deal, isn't it? And some of the more major things, alhamdulillah, the brothers that I have in my team and the sisters that I have in my team, they're all very good. So they generally listen. They're like, alhamdulillah, I can't really complain in my team with regards to...
Picking up on the point that you just made in terms of this idea of authority, as much as this is ISOCs and so forth, and without wanting to trivialise it, do you think that the principle in of itself is quite important? That wherever you're going to be in life, there's going to be a level of authority that you have to respect.
Of course. Like, it's intrinsic within our deen, this notion of listening and obeying. And that kind of nature comes from a deep respect for Allah Azza wa Jal. That's what it really goes down to. It comes from a person's iman in Allah and His Messenger, and a recognition that they are the greatest authority. And And you see, I think it actually goes down to something much deeper, and I think it's more an issue in the West than other places in the world, because we are kind of almost designed, or we are socially programmed to believe that individual liberty is the most important thing. That you being free, you doing your own thing, is the most important thing. And there is nothing more important than individual liberty and your freedom and this, that, the other. And so once a person's gone through this programming for their entire lives, and it's not something that's been explicitly said, it's just something that's internalized and believed.
What is it like? Obviously, you're saying I understand it.
I
But I want to break it down. I understand it, but you're saying that is okay. You've been programmed, but what is that like? It was just through society, but what in society?
Through society, through TV, through I mean, just the attitude that we have in the West, and it's very good in today's context and today's climate. I think of having the attitude that who are you anyway? I'm going to see if what you're doing is right. Before kind of stepping forward. But if you look, for example, in the East, in Egypt, the short time that I spent there, I realized that the people there were very submissive.
I think we're going to have to talk a little bit about Egypt.
Yeah, definitely. Just drop
We
that in.
didn't know that. We didn't know you went to Egypt.
Okay. But like, for example, I was speaking to one of the asatidha that I had there. He's a young man, but he had so many frustrations.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he was scared to do anything about it.
Right.
Because of the way the regime was, because of the fact that so many people had already died.
Okay.
Because of protesting and so on and so forth. And that kind of attitude of respect to the authority is actually very much drained into them.
Right, okay.
And it's very much in their minds. Whereas for us, it's very different.
Yeah.
For us, it's very different.
Yeah.
And so it's even, for example, the fact that we live in a democracy.
Yeah.
Just that is a huge thing. The fact that we protest.
Yeah.
I mean, protests in the East is new.
Rare.
It's new. I mean, like, since the... I don't know, like, back in the days, for you to do that, it's haram. It's haram for you to go against the ruler and go into the streets and so on and so forth. And the ulama would say that, no, don't do that. Obviously, in our situation now, it's a bit different. But we don't really want to go into that.
We might. Okay,
entirely different discussion. But the point that I wanted to make is, in Islam, the most important thing and the thing that we were created for was what?
Worship.
Worship.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that notion of worship is so different to individual liberty.
Yeah.
In fact, it's the complete opposite. That I'm a slave. I do what I'm told. Ubudiyyah. This notion that Allah Azza wa Jalla is at the top, I'm at the bottom. And of course, that notion is actually very empowering. Because when Allah Azza wa Jalla is at the top in your mind, everyone else is just like, who are you anyway?
Right. So just having that mindset can actually still give you the benefits of this individual liberty.
Without doubt. And if you look at our scholars in the past, and I think one of the questions is, what is activism? You will find that they were political activists. Imam Ahmad was a political activist. He was a social justice warrior in the good sense. not the Twitter kind.
Definitely.
Not only that, you find this, the main ulama, they were essentially, throughout history, the people who are meant to keep the power in check. If you look at it, this is essentially what the role of the ulama was, which is why they would avoid the courts and they would avoid taking money from them and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And so you find that they had that notion of ubudiyyah, and because their ubudiyyah, that servitude, was only to Allah and not to rulers or anything like that, it was primarily only to Allah.
Yeah.
They had this notion that Allah is at the top.
Yep.
And so anything that flows with Allah and His Messenger, khalas, I'm game. But anything that doesn't, I will speak out. And so they do have that kind of fire within them, this love for justice, this notion of keeping power in check and so on and so forth. But it's not based on their own whims and their own desires. It's not based on individual liberty. It's based on the will and the desire of Allah Azza wa Jal, the Sharia.
Yeah.
And that's almost empowering.
I think we kind of like, when everyone came back, so I was saying in terms of top 3 things that you learned, So there was
fellowship.
Then you had having understanding. And what was your third one that you wanted?
The third would be sabr.
Sabr,
Patience.
difficulties come. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-mu'min alladhi yukhalitu an-nas wa yasbir ala adahum khayrun min al-mu'min alladhi la yukhalitu an-nas wa la yasbir ala adahum aw kama qala." That the believer who mixes with the people and has patience over their difficulties and the adha that they give you, the harms that they give you, is better than the believer who does not mix with the people and does not kind of have sabr over their adha. And I think it's very, very important in the uni scene to realize that people will harm you. Like there will be slanders, there will be insults, there will be people who are judging you, there will be people who are thinking bad of you. It's part of the scene. Unfortunately, it's a reality.
Why is it so part of the scene? Is it just because like being university is kind of that transition between so come from immaturity
to then
going to maturity, and so there's a lot of
I don't think it's even that. I think it's just because they're human beings. Like even if you look at our parents' generation, it still exists. I mean, if Aisha radiallahu anha, the wife of the Messenger, was slandered, and she experienced huge trauma and huge difficulty,
then what have you?
Then what are we? And the Prophet ﷺ himself. The thing is, though, I think the difficulty that maybe a lot of brothers who generally they have good akhlaq and so on, that they go through, is that they don't expect it to be from the Muslims. Do you see? You expect, okay, khair, I'll be told off and people will tell me off. It will be the kuffar or it will be the enemies of Islam and so on and so forth, because I believe that Islam is the truth, and so they'd want to shut me. No, sometimes it's Muslims.
The human at the end of the day,
the shortcomings. At the end of the day. And I think that attitude of having sabr over their difficulties and taghaful, both of those are very important. Whenever you see harm from them, is so important. It's so important. And forgoing your rights sometimes is important as well. Like just because someone didn't give you their rights, it doesn't mean you always have to make a big deal out of it. And I mean, I think part of being a righteous man or woman is for you to recognize that sometimes you won't get your rights. But regardless, I'm going to give everyone else their rights as much as I'm able.
With it, like the thing of rights, like I've noticed this in some people, is that this very stuck to that idea of this is how many rights you have, this is how many rights you have, this is how many rights I have, and once we've achieved all those rights, you can't go beyond that, right? And you can't give me less than that. First of all, you can't give me less than that, but I'm not going to give you more than those rights. I'm just going to give you. But we know from Islam, that the rights are what the minimum is what you're meant to give to the brothers and sisters, You're meant to go much more beyond those rights. But I think there's a general, I mean, I've seen it in so many people, so I think it's general, right? That people think that you just give them that minimum amount of rights and you don't go beyond that. And it makes, to be honest, I think it makes your heart hard. Your heart hard, Because, like, if you think that, okay, I'm just going to give this brother these minimum things, you're not going to go over and show your love beyond that. You're not going to do more for that brother or for that sister, or even for your mother or father, For your mother and father, there's a minimum amount of rights as well, but you go above and beyond that. Allah says that obey them and treat them well, and that's the minimum, but you go beyond that. You buy them gifts, you rub their back, you do this and that.
And to be honest, those are part of their rights.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of view on the Sharia is so destructive of everything's like I remember someone actually saying that the Quran is a book of rules.
Subhanallah.
Okay.
And I realized when they said that, you don't know what the Quran is, because that's not what the Quran is at all.
It's the perspective that you're looking at it, but it's really and truly, it's
you're
a lot more than
that.
that.
It's not rules, it's guidance at the end.
Allah calls it a ruh. He calls it a spirit.
Subhanallah.
He calls it nur. A light. Do you see? Like it's not something that's like, it's not like that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure all of us are experiencing because Ramadan, in the Taraweeh and so on and so forth. Like you feel that it's almost connecting directly to your ruh. And it's amazing. And this kind of attitude of these are my rights, these are your rights, like everything's like a contract. It's very destructive.
Very textbook.
Yeah, because even if you look at the Sharia, it's got a lot of flexibility within it, even on a societal level. And the reason for that is because it allows people to be people, which is why things like urf within our Sharia, they do have a part to play in certain aspects and certain avenues.
Where there isn't a clear ruling on the Quran and Sunnah on that matter. urf.
There is.
Yeah.
So the clear ruling is that it returns back to the urf.
براية العصلية.
This
صح.
is
Yeah.
we discussed this in our last episode.
That's a slightly different point.
Sheikh Khalid as well about this.
Yeah. And so that kind of notion of urf in certain matters, it allows the sharia to be accommodating of people.
Yeah.
It allows it to be accommodating of people and being accommodating of different attitudes and realizing and recognizing that this is a universal religion. Subhanallah, like the fact that it has that kind of flexibility within it, that appreciation, it just tells me personally that it must be from Allah. Milladun Hakimun Alim, from one who is all wise and all knowing.
Do you think that concept of urf, I mean, I'm probably following on to the second point now.
Yeah.
We've said the three.
Yeah.
But I think that concept of urf is a good leeway into. Don't you think that is a very important part to understanding activism, or understanding the role of activism in Islam?
Yeah. Okay. So urf in itself, we've got to always bear in mind that urf, as a point within the Sharia, isn't as huge as it's made out by certain modernist agendas and so on and so forth, because a lot of the time what people use urf for, even though of course it's part of our Sharia, they use it as a lens to reinterpret the Sharia. And so that's very important to bear in mind. And as you mentioned, that urf is something that is generally used in places that there aren't clear guidelines or clear guidance based on the Sharia, and they're very small places generally speaking. And obviously this is something for a scholar to speak on. Again, a lot of these
Sheikh
things.
Abdus Samad.
So for a lot of these things, obviously, I shouldn't maybe mention, but I'm the type of person that when I get talking, I just talk, which is sometimes bad.
Don't worry, inshallah, we'll stop you if something goes it's outside your boundaries.
It's a bit too big. But in terms of activism and understanding activism, I think it goes down to justice, really. And activism in Islam, we can maybe think about it as being under two broad categories: da'wah and jihad. Da'wah and jihad. Da'wah being calling people to Allah Azza wa Jal and Islam and the Sharia and its perfection, warning them of the hellfire and reminding them of the paradise, and telling them that the Quran is true and every other constitution of life is false. So that is maybe the comprehensive understanding of da'wah. It's not for you to just do nice things to other people. It's not for you to just smile. Because again, how are they? I think there's a huge logical fallacy there and a huge jump, to be honest, for you to say that I'm going to smile at them and I'm going to be really nice at them and eventually they're going to become Muslim. Because there needs to be steps in between.
Yeah.
And as for jihad, then of course that is the struggle to establish justice within the world. And it's not just physically, it's also through speech, it's also through writing, it's also to speak a word of truth in front of a tyrant, exactly. And of course the greatest injustice is the injustice of Allah Azza wa Jal, that people say that there are others like Allah, or they make themselves like Allah, and this is a perspective that I think we often neglect.
It's lost,
And we were talking about rights, we're always talking about human rights, we're even talking about animal rights now. But what about the rights of Allah? What about the rights of Allah? What is the haqq of Allah upon the ibad?
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
go on.
One thing I did want to bring out just before we move on, would you say the personal struggle, the jihad and nafs, is probably the most incumbent thing before you do the kind of outward?
Again, I think this
Or
is
that
another one of
influx?
those fallacies that people tell themselves, and it actually kind of it's a weakness within the person, that they tell themselves that I'm going to work on myself and I'm not ready to work on others until I've become perfect.
Yeah.
Well, there's that aspect, but then there's also the other aspect of the
But
two
if
in
I-
tandem.
yeah.
In tandem, would
Yeah.
you say that as much as obviously you're doing things in the outward sense,
Yeah.
there has to be a level where your
So
personal
I was going
struggle-
to get to that, but just before that though, we find, for example, the Prophet ﷺ saying, "What
Sallallahu
balligh
alaihi
anni walau ayah."
Yes.
That convey from me
Subhanallah.
even if it's a single ayah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all know
That's true.
Qul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu
Do
kufuwan
we know it?
Subhanallah.
Do you know it? That's did I make a mistake?
No. You just paused.
I thought you were going to do another riwayah
Like, hold on a minute. Do I know it? Okay. And I think it's very important that we realize that sometimes those getting involved in activism and getting involved with good brothers and good sisters, that actually helps with the jihadun nafs and the tazkiyatun nafs. And that's very important. Why? Because the shaitan, what does he go for? He goes for the stray wolf, stray sheep, isn't it? The one that's alone, that's to himself, and so on and so forth. And one of our scholars, subhanAllah, he gave me some amazing advice. I was consulting him about going somewhere for a while where I'd be quite isolated. And he warned me, saying that within every single person there's a zayg, there's a kind of deviance or a misguidance within themselves. And what happens is when you're alone, that zayg, that it doesn't come out, it just kind of grows. And you kind of flow with it, you go with it, you keep thinking about it, and it kind of overcomes your mind, that misguidance or that deviance or that fault within yourself. You normalize it and you rationalize it, and it becomes huge. Whereas when you're with other people, like if I was, for example, to say something out of line here, you'd be like, no, I don't really agree with that. You know what, you made a mistake there.
And then it gets shut down straight away.
Exactly, that's the thing.
Dwarfed.
And so it doesn't grow, it doesn't grow anymore. And that happened to me so many times. So many times, for example, I had a thought, and I would say it to some people, and they'd be like, no, that's maybe a misreading of the situation, or maybe you misunderstood that point, or you didn't really think about that. And these are my peers. It's not as if I'm going to a sheikh and saying these things and so on. It's just my friends, that we're just having a discussion, we're having a conversation, and they're like, no, I don't think you got that right.
Do you think this is the kind of the essence to kind of like spying on other people? Because what usually happens when there's a situation or a rumor that you hear, you don't share it with others. You take it upon yourself to be like, oh, I heard about that. Like, you know, is that true? Is that not true? And you allow it to grow and build, and then that's the same kind of thing.
It's almost like every doubt, basically. That it just starts off like a little tiny ball, and it's just like a snowball, just gets bigger and bigger. But of course, having said that, the Prophet ﷺ, he would always have personal, private worship. And I think this is maybe a huge issue within myself, as well as just generally within the uni scene, that there's a lot of public work, but the private work it's not really there.
Like I think it's a good discussion, because to be honest, I think there's arguments on both sides, of going out there and doing, doing that kind of activist work and helping the ummah and things like that, and sharing that knowledge of that one ayah that you have, and not being, caught up in that, as you said, that fallacy of sticking to yourself and being alone for however many number of years and then coming out. I think there's a lot of arguments for that, but I think also on the other side, there's a lot of arguments that stand true as well. That because of what you just mentioned, that in the university scene especially, there's a lot of outward work, but there's not much inward. So maybe it depends on the context of which side you take. You might have to take in that context, you might have to give advice to these brothers and sisters that are doing ISOC work, that focus on your inputs rather than your outputs, because your outputs are all there. Right, and it's always there because you're part of ISOC. So now focus on your inputs as much as you can. But maybe in other situations, it might be that somebody has so many skills and attributes, but is holding them back because he's trying to study and go abroad and study and stay with a scholar and study for 5 to 10, 20 years before he's like, okay, now I'm going to go help the ummah with everything that I learned. I think maybe it depends on the context, but I think there's arguments on both sides.
Without doubt. And the other point is, I think there's always a jump as well, that we assume that activism is always public. That's not always the case. And for example, if you can't give a talk, who says you have to give a talk anyway? Organize the chairs, organize the refreshments. Just be involved. That's it. That's all it is.
Be part of the team.
Just be part of the team. That's it. Do charity week. Hold a bucket. Do some charity work. I don't know. Like, there's so many things that you can get involved in that it doesn't really make sense to me for you to say that I'm just going to work on myself.
In fact, even a lot of events in ISOC anyway, there are a lot of people that perhaps don't get the credit on the day that have been part of the project for 10, 12 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, it's more likely that they'll get more reward than the person who's on the stage who's hosting. Because, how easy, I'm sure all of us have hosted events. How easy is it for your intention to just get robbed? And like, you didn't even expect it.
And to be honest, at the end of the day, the amount of time and effort you're putting in is not as much as these people. They're trying to organize everything behind the scenes. You've just gone on the stage with a nice iron blazer, you know, slick hair, and you've said a few words that sound nice, and then you come off.
Slick hair, yeah.
Okay, maybe not you, but me.
But no, yeah, it's true, wallahi, it's true. And I remember, subhanAllah, reading one of the people of the past, I can't remember who it was, they said that the process of me perfecting my intention is more difficult than the act itself. It's more difficult than the act itself. And I think that's something that we can, without doubt, witness. And alhamdulillah, a lot of the people who are in the background, they actually smashed it.
Yeah.
They actually, mashallah, these are the people who really excelled. And most likely on the Day of Judgment, they're the ones who are going to be far ahead of us.
Because to be honest, why else would you stack chairs and put out food? For what reason? No one's going to praise you for doing that. You're purely doing it because you know you have, this is the correct intention. You're doing it for the sake of the program so that people can benefit, for the sake of Allah.
And if you think about it, even just stacking chairs, the amount of ajr that you can get from that, every single person who sits there, you can't have an event without chairs.
No. You're facilitating towards good. So.
I mean, even if the speaker drops out, you might be able to get someone else. If the host goes, like, khalas, you can get someone else. Yeah. But the chairs
no chairs.
Yeah, if there's no chairs, what are you going to do? And a lot of the time, we look at these things as if, they don't value me, they don't see. What we need to realize is that it's not about how people value you, it's about how Allah values you. And the intention is really the key thing behind all of these things. And so I agree with you entirely that there needs to be the internal dimension as well. Because a lot of the time people do just get involved and they don't even know what they're doing. How many ISOC presidents have you spoken to when you ask them, what's the role of your ISOC? Or what's the aim of ISOC in your university?
It's always the question, isn't it?
They have no idea.
SubhanAllah.
They have no idea. How could that be the case where the leader of the organization doesn't know what his organization is doing? That means he's forgotten to make an intention. Because your aims, your vision, and all those are all intentions.
Yeah.
And I've come across many cases where volunteers or maybe helpers within the ISOC anyway are more well versed with that question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because a lot of the time it's just something that's just swallowed, that's just put on you, and so you're in such a rush from the beginning to the end that that by the end of the you lose sight of it. And this is why ibadah is so important. I remember also reading, someone said, it was actually a non-Muslim, that the organizer, a person who's organizing many different things, it's very important for him to have a huge degree of internal organization to deal with all of the external chaos around him. And that internal kind of strength, it comes from the Quran and it comes from worship. And tazkiyatun nafs and tarbiyyah programs and spending time with other people who are better than you, more intelligent than you.
Almost humbles you.
It's not even a humbling thing, it's just
learning.
Yeah, it's just learning. It's just like
it's just being in that space.
It's just recognizing you're not that great.
Yeah. And I have to take care of myself. I'm actually not that good, and I have to keep working on myself.
Yeah, and I need self-help.
Yeah.
I've got problems.
So what's the next thing on the agenda then?
It's challenges and limitations.
Okay.
Challenges and limitations.
Yeah, I feel like we've eased into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Challenges and limitations of
basically ISOCs.
ISOCs.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a big question. I think the loss of vision is a big thing. That's a huge. Sorry. That's a huge issue. The fact that there's so many people who are just doing because their friends are doing, or because it's just fashionable, or because if I don't, they'd be like, oh, why didn't you volunteer? And all of these sorts of things. I think that's a big issue that we have, especially in big ISOCs. Like King's is probably one of the largest. And I think that's a big issue that we have, that people do things sometimes out of peer pressure, rather than doing it for the sake of Allah. And this is a big thing. This is a big thing.
Is that almost like a bandwagon effect? Brother X, Y, and Z is doing this, so I feel like this is the right time for me. But in a sense also, if we look at it from a balanced point of view, that's almost quite good, because you could find that could be the beginning of an involvement of a brother who perhaps wouldn't have been involved in ISOC as well.
100%. But the thing is, like, I'm not saying that people shouldn't get involved, even if they're worried about their intentions. Obviously, that's not the case. That's not what the scholars say.
Yeah.
You get involved and you try and fix your intention during the act. But what I'm saying is that sometimes, and you actually find this a lot with leaders who had very successful predecessors. They often, at the beginning, they will copy almost their predecessor.
Right.
And who are they worshipping at that time? Are they worshipping Allah Azza wa Jal, or are they worshipping even their predecessor?
Right.
Where they're almost copying him and imitating him, not recognizing that he himself, that person who came before him, had shortcomings, and you have shortcomings, and you have strengths that he doesn't have.
I've come across that paradigm, but what a point that I would interject there. So obviously there is that difficulty that who's the authority here, but there's also an element of I'm preparing myself for this position.
Yeah.
I need to really.
I
need to adapt.
Yeah, of course, without doubt. But what I mean, for example, is like very minute things that are very individual for that person.
Okay.
Like, for example, style, or the way a person is. Sometimes even it comes down to things like dress and these sorts of things. Or even like suluk, just general behavior, mannerisms, and so on and so forth. That's not seeking advice and getting guidance from your predecessor. That's a must. I mean, doing shura, going to your predecessors, listening to them, listening to their advice, making sure that you're not doing things that's 180 from what they were doing. That's very important, obviously. I'm not kind of dishing that. What I'm saying is, for example, a person realizing that they have their own style, that they are their own person, they have their own
originality.
Originality, and all of these things. And also recognize, for example, I speak a lot, as you can see from this kind of discussion.
That's why we wanted you.
And so, like, even this year, astaghfirullah, like, I did loads of speeches in King's.
Okay.
Inshallah, next year, because I'm staying on, I'm going to do fewer.
Are you staying on with your role?
Unfortunately, yeah.
so
I'm going to, inshallah, that's one of my plans, to speak less, inshallah, next year. But
what do you mean in terms of speeches? Is it just like just reminders or khutbas?
Khutbas. We also had a tarbiyyah program.
Okay.
Just loads.
So you were kind of leading most of those things?
I wouldn't say leading, just speaking. I would just say speaking, because it was a team effort without doubt, everything that we did. And like I said, my team is solid, mashallah, tabarakallah. The brothers and sisters, they're on point.
But that's interesting, because now we're talking about challenges, so you might want to expose what went wrong with the team. Obviously, you're not saying names or whatever, but it would be good to get an idea of if you're saying that mashallah, your team is really good. I'm sure there's other brothers and sisters listening that are also part of teams that they think is good, or even if they know it's bad, though, they might want to.
No, I think it's a recognition that every team will have problems, and without doubt, we did have problems throughout the year. I think maybe another challenge is the challenge of amana. It's a big thing, wallahi. It's so big. You tell someone, a brother, something, or you tell a sister something, it's in confidence, and it spreads, and there's only so much taghaful that you can have.
Yeah, is an example of something. Obviously, not exposing it, but is there an example of something that had happened?
The reason I wouldn't want to give examples is because, especially because it's being recorded, the person might feel as if, oh, he's calling me out, or he's indirecting me, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
I don't want to do anything like that. I don't want them to think that I'm bitter about anything, or anything of that nature.
Picking up on your earlier point on
but I can give like maybe
the element of balance, right?
Yeah.
In such a situation where you obviously you know that things are going to happen where your rights are going to be foregone, and would you say this is where you have to be a bit more, not necessarily understanding, in the sense that this is a weakness of the human?
One issue that I had that was quite a major thing, to be honest. A scholar that I spoke to, he just said, just let it go. I spoke to quite a few people. Some of them said, remove him, get him out of the team, that he's destructive, and so on and so forth. And one scholar, he just said to him, just let it go. It will take up too much space in your brain. And it was taking up a lot of brain space. I was stressing out about it. I was thinking about it every time I would be riding on my bike. It would just be like, in my head, and so on and so forth. And to be honest, I think that's something that's really important for you to just be able to let certain things go.
Yeah.
Tell them that, you did this, bro. And I was actually quite upset by that.
Yeah.
But let's move on. Just don't do it again. And sometimes it's better to do it subtly, because you'll embarrass the person if you say it straight up that you did this to me and you hurt my feelings. Like, for example, one thing that I would sometimes do is, say, for example, had a particular, and this, to be honest, it works quite well with sisters, because with sisters it's very difficult to give negative feedback straight up, isn't it? Because sometimes they take it personally, even when you didn't mean it like that. And so sometimes, for example, you might notice something or an issue occurred between that sister and another person, or between even yourself and that sister, and that same sister or another sister comes to you with an issue. Two other completely different people, but it's a very similar kind of situation. And sometimes just you telling her or telling him how to deal with that situation, it's like it's a long way of telling you to tell him, like, your issue.
Okay,
basically.
indirectly.
Telling him indirectly, telling him
right.
subtly, and his izzah is maintained. He feels happy, and on top of that, because he's actioning it, of course he'll action it within himself as well, isn't it? And maybe that's a way of dealing with like these sorts of issues, particularly when you're hurt, because when you're hurt by something, it's very easy for you to say something emotional and say a statement or shout at them or something like that, and they never forget it.
Very difficult to take that back as well.
Very difficult to take that back. You can say 100 good words, but if you say one bad word, they'd remember that one.
Yeah.
They'd remember that one. And even like with good words, they think that, oh, maybe he's just saying it, and so on and so. But when you say a bad word, they're like, he definitely meant that. He definitely meant that.
In terms of some of the challenges and limitations of ISOCs, firstly, what is like a general vision of an ISOC that you can give us? What should be like what an ISOC should set out to do, and what have you noticed in that has made it hard to actually complete that vision from your own experience as well? And maybe we can share our own experiences too, because I've been there, done that, and I've seen kind of how a vision just breaks down subhanAllah sometimes.
Yeah.
Almost through your phone.
So I think very simply, the main aim of the ISOC is to just get people closer to Allah. Very, very simply.
Okay.
And that is the primary role of the ISOC.
Yeah.
And that obviously includes services, that includes da'wah, that includes bir work, just generally just doing good things. That includes stuff like charity and sadaqah. But that notion of just getting people closer to Allah is the main thing behind the ISOC, in my opinion at least.
Okay.
And of course there's also other things like representing Muslims on campus, providing services to the Muslims, making sure that their religious rights are upheld, and all of those things. But I think all of those things are kind of underneath that broad heading.
Okay. And what do you think, in your experience, hasn't met that, or something that's happened at ISOC that just showed you we're not really achieving that, are we?
So again, I think one of the biggest things, especially in big ISOCs, is that it just becomes very logistical.
Okay.
Like we've got to have CW, we've got to have DIW, we've got to have this week, that week. The whole year is just full of weeks, to be honest. In large ISOCs. And
why is that such an issue?
Because what happens is when it becomes very logistical,
Yeah.
you forget that the main thing that you're doing through this project is to get
Allah.
And so you see, for example, on the outside it's all there,
Right.
but where is the reminder?
Okay.
Where is the nasiha?
Interesting that you mentioned that point.
Where is the link between that person who's using your service or who's getting involved with your project and Allah Azza wa Jal himself?
Right.
And a lot of the time you will find that sometimes that link is missing.
Sometimes do you think that it becomes, I just need a lot of people to be part of that week, rather than these people, I need them to benefit from the week?
And of course it's a balance as well, because we're running organizations here. So it's important to have KPIs and have key performance indicators and all of those things. But at the same time, it's very important to realize that our degree of, our kind of criteria for success is the rida of Allah, is the pleasure of Allah. And so that's not something that you can really see. It's just something that I guess we hope for in the next life. But of course there are signs.
And also the point that I was going to make was that you almost find that ISOCs are not actually focusing on the need of their specific
That was
people.
The second point I was going to say. That, for example, you find like a project that's been done so many times that everyone's bored of it.
Yeah.
And no one cares about it anymore.
Like,
and it's
give
not
an example.
And it's not getting anyone closer to Allah, and it's not getting anyone closer to the Messenger.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it still just continued for the sake of it. It still continued. I'll give you an example. For example, for our charity week, we always do an auction.
Okay.
Okay.
Always. To the extent, I guess for the first years, like it's nice, it's new, it's fresh.
Yeah.
Well, it's my 5th year now.
Need something different. Yeah.
Like we need to think of something new.
Yeah.
Because we've been doing it for like 10 years.
Wow.
And obviously that's a very minor example, but it's an example of those things that you just do more out of tradition. And it's just like, it worked, so let's just keep doing it.
Do you think you kind of you have to review the environment that you're working in? So, I mean, recently somebody's he's told me that he's become Ameer of his ISOC, so he messaged me because he knew I was before. Actually, I don't really like using Ameer, to be honest. I don't really like using that word, but anyway, I used it.
Who say responsible, maybe?
Yeah. And so he asked for some advice. So I told him one of the main things that I learned from my time, and something that hopefully I did implement properly, is to understand the context of the environment that you're working in and making sure that you're tailoring what the ISOC is doing to that environment. Because what I noticed is a lot of other kind of new brothers and sisters who've kind of recently become responsible of their ISOC and become leaders over the ISOC, they're taking templates from what they learned about other ISOCs. They learn it from King's, from QM, from LSE, from Imperial, and then they're going to areas which are kind of far out. I was in Essex, or somebody might be in like Southampton or Portsmouth or something, and they're trying to take these ones that are established, take their template and use it in their environment.
Which is fine, of course.
Some of the template, yeah, it's fine. You should learn from how ISOCs are run instead of just trying to think of something yourself. But at the same time, understand your environment. If you know that the majority of Muslims that are going to come to your ISOC are not generally practicing, then why would you hold a session every single week on Riyadh al-Salihin and invite scholars down that are going to give like big pumping lectures? Maybe slow it down, have some general nasihas after salah instead of something really like big. Have just like football, have like a sisters' night, something like that, that brings those non-practicing people together.
Exactly.
And almost also catering for the other elements of ISOC, which is others.
Is just know what your environment is.
Exactly, 100%. And it goes back to the aim. What's the aim? It's to get these people closer to Allah. And so depending on the people that you have, of course, your strategy will be different. And this is the thing. Sometimes what happens is the strategy becomes the aim.
Right.
The aim is Charity Week. The aim is to have DIW. Not to make people get closer to Allah. And for the deen of Islam to be shown for its true beauty. And so, mashallah, that's a very important point, I think.
Yeah. I think, I mean, just to carry on from that as well, I mean, it looks like I'm the guest. I mean, I'm the guest. But to be honest, I think it's good to have like a rounded discussion.
No, without doubt, yeah.
So I lost my train of thought now.
Rounded discussion. I feel like you were going on about...
I feel like I was...
we were talking about challenges.
On challenges. Okay, Mahmoud, why don't you take over from me and maybe I'll come back to it.
So just picking up on that point, I think, so what is ISOC all about then? If, there are these fluxes and things like this, how can you have a fulfilling ISOC journey, a fulfilling ISOC experience?
I think it's balancing between those outward kind of projects and making sure your team is okay. That's so important. So within King's, for example, we've had a fair amount of kind of tarbiyyah projects and so on and so forth, and kind of taking care of your committee, making sure that they're getting tarbiyyah, that they're being reminded, and so on and so forth, is really the primary role of the Ameer. One of the primary roles, at least, of the Ameer, and the various major volunteers, making sure that they're okay, and having that dimension removes a lot of the bitterness that a lot of people feel towards ISOC, and it gives them a fulfilling kind of feeling at the end of the year. I think the other thing is, and I'm not the best at this to be honest, is actually to be a bit soft on people. I'm kind of like a harshish person, so...
You don't seem it, bro. Have to be in your team to know.
No, generally in mixed teams I've become a lot more staunch as well.
I'm going to ask them.
No, I've been told that I'm scary, yeah. So Alhamdulillah.
soft.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that kind of softness is also important. And to realize that you're dealing with people, that there's so many things going on in their lives, being accommodating of that. If someone fails on a responsibility, realizing that khalas, maybe you failed, rather than being the first thing that you ask them. And this is something that I learned from a brother actually. Why did you not do this? Is everything okay?
Right.
Just asking those
Is everything okay?
key questions. Yeah.
Just start
Yeah,
off
be
by
normal.
saying, is everything okay? I noticed that you didn't manage to put in the project plan, for example. What happened? If you do it like that, he doesn't feel like he's being challenged. He feels like, oh, he cares. He cares. Maybe there was something that was going on in my life that or his life that I didn't know about. And you'll find, subhanAllah, that when you do speak to your team members, a lot of them are going through the madness, a lot more than you're going through.
And it's easier to accommodate.
It's a lot more easier. It's a lot easier to accommodate.
And that's, I mean, I think both points go hand in hand. What you said, that making sure that your committee is okay and have the tarbiyyah, being soft with them so you can implement that and understand it.
Exactly. Obviously, though, with sisters, it's important to be a bit more careful because there's obviously boundaries that Islam has set out. But particularly with the brothers, that's very important. And obviously, sisters with sisters. So whoever the major head sister is or whatever, it's important that she has that kind of attitude with the sisters.
I think maybe even generally, even outside of the committee, because I just remembered what I wanted to say and it links to this point, is that it's not about, for me personally, ISOC is not about having the flashiest events or having loads of events. It's about whether those people that are coming to the ISOC, whether they're benefiting from it. And the way that they're going to benefit from it is exactly this, is making sure that you're there to build a relationship with them and connect them. If you can build a relationship by doing no events throughout the year and just doing socials, then do that. Yeah. And if the big events are going to make you build relationships, then do it. But it has to be about exactly what you said, being soft with the people, taking care of them, giving tarbiyyah to them to make sure that that's how you fulfill that ISOC vision that you said at the start.
And I think that point about context, actually, you actually just reminded me of something that you mentioned. In Kings, for example, we have 3 different campuses. And all 3 are different with different challenges and different kind of attitudes. And even within Kings, for example, one of our smaller campuses, they would sometimes be a little bit intimidated by the bigger campuses that they're bringing 200, 300 people. We're only bringing 20. And it's the same. For your it's the same organization, but at the same time, it's just important to bear that point in mind, that it's your context that you're in charge of. And so long as you're kind of fulfilling the right of the people in your flock or in your context, then alhamdulillah. And that point about relations is pivotal. That if you've got 20 people, but all 20 know you, and all 20 get closer to Allah, that's so much easier than having 200 people that you barely know. And it's a lot tougher, to be honest, when there's so many people that it's very difficult to maintain relations with every single one. But alhamdulillah, some of the brothers in my team, they're solid at it, mashallah.
One last point, with obviously labouring the discussion, but I feel like it's quite important when a first year comes into university, maybe another first year who's coming in has this view of ISOC, this preconception. So he's heard X, Y, and Z. This is how ISOCs run. I know from my own personal view, ISOC was my safe space going into uni. And just the discussions I was having with brothers in my local area, they were like, get involved in your ISOC, make sure you make the most of the brotherhood. And it really helped me tremendously. So what would you say for perhaps a first year or a person who comes into university thinking X, Y, and Z about, or having preconceptions about ISOCs that perhaps are not necessarily true? How can they reconcile that, especially at the beginning? And just on that point, what can ISOCs do to cater for that? Because I know freshers events and things like this, what could they do to make it more relatable?
So that's $1 million question.
You've got 5 years of experience, bro.
I wanted to ease into it, but I felt like if we're going to move on, I want to get there.
I like it, it's a good one.
But maybe from my own kind of experience, like I said, I've been involved in ISOCs since my college days. And my brother hated ISOCs, my older brother. he always had a bone to pick with ISOCs. They're all hypocrites, they're all this, that, the other. And so I went in, I am not going to get involved in ISOC.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, in
that
college.
was your intention.
That was I was practicing, alhamdulillah. But like, I'm like, bun ISOC.
Forget that.
Yeah, forget that. I'm not about that. And I was a bit of a loner. and so on and so forth. And then I became the vice president of the in college. And it was just because a lot of the time there's a lot of bias, a lot of stereotypes, some of which are, to be honest, based on truth. There are some brothers, there are some sisters who do have shortcomings. I mean, they're not saints. They will make mistakes. We've all made mistakes. And sometimes what happens is a person kind of justifies their own shortcomings and their own weaknesses by vilifying someone else. And I personally think that ISOCs are vilified a lot of the time by people. For me personally, for example, like I'm always thinking about loads of things. And so I'm just walking through the campus and I'm not judging anyone. But like people tell me that they felt really judged and I'm just like, oh, okay. You must have been doing something to be judged because I had no idea. And sometimes it's just, you know, I think it's just more like a internal thing that they're kind of battling. And I think it's important for people in ISOCs to take it into consideration, but not take it too seriously. And make it the end all and the be all, the end all and the be all. Because one major challenge in today's kind of ISOC scene is the challenge of inclusivity. And maybe we can get on to that point, and maybe I can share some thoughts on that after I finish answering your question. The other side to that, though, of course, is what Shuaib said about looking at your context, looking at the people that you have, and just catering towards their needs and their interests. Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to move into having some insights into what. So we've talked a lot about ISOC, but what about outside of ISOC? What organizations are there that are facilitating activism for Muslims? I mean, for a lot of the brothers and sisters living here in UK and Britain, Muslim activism kind of starts from ISOC, generally, yeah? Or especially student-led activism starts with ISOCs. But what's outside of that that might be facilitating activism a bit more? I think a key thing is we're all part of it, all of us, is Sabeel. I think maybe we can touch in a little bit into Sabeel and maybe anything else that you're involved in.
So Sabeel in itself it's not really an activist type project, and it's very important to give everything its due. And without doubt, Sabeel, personally having graduated from it this year, has had a huge impact on my life, especially over the last 3 years. And in ISOC presidency, you get the maddest questions. Like I've had to explain Aqidah points, I've had to explain fiqh points to people who aren't learned, to people who are just your average, you know, Maryam and Abdullah.
I like that. That's going to be the new one. It's not from
that's Maryam and Abdullah.
So, like, you just find generally that learning is very important. And so Sabeel does give you that opportunity and that ability. And I personally feel that it is probably one of the best institutes in the UK for university students, simply because it's so flexible, and the approach of study as well. It's not, this is the book, this is what you must learn. It's, this is the book, let's discuss it.
Why do you think so many kind of Muslim students or ISOCers get attracted to Sabeel? I mean, we've all been part of ISOC and we're in Sabeel, and we know other brothers in Sabeel, and even their sisters on the sisters part that are part of ISOC as well, and they're in Sabeel. Why do you think it is that it's attractive?
Maybe, inshallah, it's because of the sincerity of the people who laid it down. May Allah accept it from them. And because it's a tried and tested method. Sabeel has been around, as we know from the brother, for ages, for over a decade. And it's been modified and it's been developed in such a way that now it's actually very solid. Very solid. And personally, I don't think there's a better way of teaching usul al-fiqh, which is basically what Sabeel is. It's all a glamorous course on usul al-fiqh, than the way that Sabeel do it, by discussing it, by thinking about it. And to be honest, a lot of the shubuhat that come, the doubts, the ideological doubts, the philosophical doubts, it comes from that perspective, and it's solved through the skills that you learn from Sabeel. So I think Sabeel is very important, and it has a key role to play. As for the sisters side, I think maybe Sabeel is a better strategy for brothers. It's just speaking to some of the sisters in my ISOC and some of the sisters that I've worked with, it's just difficult for them. going out on the weekends and so on and so forth, family, parents, and so on. And so I think what's really needed, inshallah, from the current generation of sisters is for them to have the ambition to essentially be what our murabbis are in Sabeel for the next generation. They need to realize that unfortunately, currently there's not many opportunities available for you, and it's difficult and it's tough. And the reality is the space for sisters to get involved in activism is a lot smaller than that for brothers. Wrongly so, of course. And so it's important for them to have the ambition in knowledge, in particular, to learn about the deen, such that they could be role models to sisters.
I think that's a very key point that you mentioned, actually, because I've seen a trend now of sister groups, halaqat, and various things like this, where they're benefiting one another and taking the darajat to benefit in terms of ilm.
But this is the thing, though, that benefit will only go so far because they don't have enough knowledge. And so, inshallah, it's important for them to have that himmah, for them to have that ambition, and to make a lot of dua for it. And they have a huge opportunity that we don't have, because they have the opportunity of laying down the foundations for future sisters in the UK. And we don't have that opportunity anymore because it's been laid down. Sabeel is there. And we just kind of...
Maybe you're not the right person to ask, but do you have an idea of where the sisters could go with it, or which way they should take it to kind of establish that?
So, like, as a man, to be honest, I can't really comment much on that. But the main thing that I would say is for them to make groups together, and I think it's very important for them to kind of find their own space and for them to take care of each other. Because when brothers and sisters start working together, there's so many problems that ensue. And I didn't really touch on some of the stereotypes that are within ISOCs, but I mean, I'm sure we all know of cases and situations where unfortunately malpractice occurred between brothers and sisters, because maybe there was too much trust on the sister's side, or the brother, he kind of became relaxed, and so on and so forth. And it's important to realize that fitna is there. It's there. And so it's best, inshallah, for the sisters to work with each other, for them to have interactions, for them to discuss what the problems are for them and find solutions to those problems. And they just need to make dua that Allah gives them the ability and forges for them a path to knowledge, because it's difficult for them. But one sister that we met in Lebanon, subhanAllah, she graduated from Azhar, a widow, and she said to us, subhanAllah, because a few of us, like I mentioned, we went to Egypt and so on and so forth. So she asked one of the brothers, he asked for advice on talabul ilm, on seeking knowledge, and she said, "Hada jihad. This is a jihad. Wa jihadukum akbar min jihadi." And your jihad is greater than my jihad. Because obviously, for us as being in the West, there's not as many scholars. We have to travel and so on and so forth. Obviously, it wasn't the case. The things that she's experienced and the things that she's gone through, far greater than the things that we've done and the things that we've experienced. But I think it most definitely is the case for sisters, that their jihad is greater than our jihad when it comes to knowledge, when it comes to seeking knowledge. And so rather than seeing it as a huge mountain that will never be climbed, all we need really is 3 or 4 sisters or 5 sisters to have the ambition, to have the drive, and for them to make dua for Allah to facilitate for them a path of knowledge. And obviously it's important that they prioritize their families, they think about their parents and their families and so on and so forth. But I'm sure there will be, within the next generation, at least a few ustadhas who can kind of pave the way for that. And it's important for it to be a female role model. It's so important. Like, I can talk about feminism if I want, and I can talk about liberalism and all of these things, but to be honest, they just won't listen.
It's only going to come right, and something going to sit right in their head if it comes from somebody who is from them.
Exactly.
And this is the example. It's the will of Allah and the fitrah of the way of Allah, that it comes from the people. When He sent the messengers, how many times do we hear in the Quran that the messengers are from the people, from amongst like them, and they bring out this ideology of monotheism through that.
I think it is also important to bear in mind, though, in terms of like the brothers who have sisters and who are married and all of these things, that it's important for them to facilitate for the women of their own household, because that's
Take
the only.
responsibility of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and give them space.
Yeah.
Give them space.
Yeah.
Because particularly like in Bengali culture, it's actually very difficult for women. Like even for you to want to seek knowledge, like why?
Yeah. No,
You're a girl.
Yeah, you don't need
Like
your husband knows stuff.
Yeah,
he can
like,
teach you.
yeah,
You need to
like-
stay at home, take care of the kids,
Yeah.
cook. Yeah.
like obviously all of those things are important, taking care of the kids and the family and all. Like, I'm
But
not
it's just,
taking
it's
it
just
away
that
from
knowledge gets thrown to the side.
That's the thing. I
Yeah.
mean, like, why does it have to
Takes
be
a
one or the
backseat.
other?
Yeah.
I mean, working is
exactly.
very important for a man.
Yeah.
It's very important that you're working and so on and so forth. But does that mean that you don't seek knowledge? Does that mean that you don't learn and you don't study and you don't teach and so on and so forth? And so I
'Cause
think
really and truly, this is the knowledge that you're going to be practicing
that's the
in
thing.
your life.
That's the thing. That's
really
the
and
thing.
truly.
Sorry, what was the question?
So I was about in terms of organizations that can actually facilitate
talking
about
activism
Sabeel.
for
Yeah.
Muslims. So we were talking
Yeah.
about Sabeel and we went on a tangent.
And
about
having
it,
said
yeah.
that, obviously, whilst
Phosis and
whilst
various others.
being a Sabili myself
Yeah.
and having gone through the Sabeel program, I think it's also important to bear in mind that Sabeel is not the end all and the be all.
Okay.
It's also very important for a person to have other scholars, for them to experience different types of tarbiyyah programs, because by going through various tarbiyyah programs, a person becomes more comprehensive and a person becomes better. And not only that, they understand the other point of view. And having that attitude is very important, particularly in the West, where we've just got so many different opinions and so many different ideas. It's important for us to be able to understand and appreciate where people are coming from.
Yeah.
And sometimes that just comes from having and knowing scholars of different ilks.
So do you think, I mean, if it's not, I'm not sure if you touched on it, but if it's not Sabeel that can give benefit to the Muslim activist scene, I mean, it may give benefit, but that's not its primary goal, is what you said. It's different to that. What other, I mean, there's Fosis as well. Would you say that Fosis has a part to play in that kind of a Muslim activist scene, or do you think there's other organizations that can assist in that?
I think there's so many. Do you mean like for activism itself, not for tarbiyyah activism, yeah?
For activism.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
activism, there's so many. We have MRDF, we have MEND, we have FOSIS, we have CW, S4S. You got the show.
Yeah.
There's just so
Hashtag
many.
it.
There's so many.
Okay, so from the ones that you've been involved, I mean, you're involved in Students for Syria.
Yeah.
You're in a way involved in FOSIS through ISOCs. What has been your experience and how these external organizations to ISOCs can actually help those students that are involved in ISOC with their activism to actually further that, or to actually even facilitate better what they're doing in ISOCs? Do you think it has a crossover? So like you being a student for Syria, do you think that had a crossover into how you dealt with the ISOC, or do you think it's kind of broadened your scope as well
Of
in
course,
terms
yeah,
of more
100%,
activism? You want to touch on that a bit?
I think the first thing to realize is that ISOCs are inward-looking organizations.
Yeah.
And the organizations that we mentioned there, they're more outward-looking organizations.
Yeah.
And that's fine, so long as that is internalized and that is thought about. And coming from an outward organization like CW or FOSIS or whatever you may be, it's very important for you to realize that the person that you're speaking to, the committee members, most likely, inshallah, obviously it's not always the case, but they know their context best. And a lot of the time what happens is ill feelings are created when those external organizations kind of completely destroy a game plan. Completely destroy a game plan. And it's very important that we realize that we're one ummah. That it's fine for us to have all of these organizations, and despite us having different strategic visions and different understandings and so on, even if we have different goals, that's fine, so long as we realize that we're all here for Allah, and recognizing that what he's doing, I might disagree with it, I might think is wrong, but it's not haram. And I might be wrong. And I think that's a very important point that we need to bear in mind in FOSIS, in all of those sorts of external organizations. But in terms of their helping, obviously they help so much, especially for smaller ISOCs. They're very empowering. And I think it's a huge blessing that we have here in London and in the UK, that we have these organizations that are there when big issues occur. For me personally, I know I made a lot of use of Brother Aqiq, who's in FOSIS, who was involved with the student politics side, because it's not really my forte. As well as our student, I know our student affairs lead, he would speak to various other people, and just having that kind of link and having that association with people who are better than you in that field is just pivotal.
And interestingly, you actually hinted at it in terms of this idea of kind of student affairs and things like this. In the scene that we have now in universities, we have, alhamdulillah, we have a trend now where a lot of Muslims are getting involved in student affairs, in the student union. A lot of SAC officers, which is obviously the terminology that's used nowadays for the student affair positions after you graduate or in between kind of graduate years. But at the same time,
there's even a lot of students that were involved in starting that Labour Muslim network.
Yes,
Previous ice hockers and FOSIS people were involved in that.
And obviously shout out to Mend as well with things like Islamophobia campaigns and things like this. So you would say there's a big movement in that sense. What would you say in terms of Muslim representation, not just that at kind of the university level, but also maybe going further? National Union of Students, NUS, that sort of thing.
So again, maybe on this point, I'd like to give disclaimer. Yeah, that's it. A disclaimer that we're all very young, and so it's natural that we might change our views and we might change our attitudes. But at the moment, I've personally not immediately been involved in that scene, but I do have friends who have been involved, and I've spoken to them and kind of took their take on the situation. And personally, I think obviously it's important for us to have some representation, but it's not important for them to always necessarily be all Muslim, because there are so many issues when doing that. By, for example, the ISOC becoming almost like a political party within the university. What you do is you create a huge amount of dogma, and people almost hate the ISOC. Non-Muslims as well. Don't forget, the ISOC's remit is also to bring non-Muslims closer to Allah. It's not just the Muslims.
And so the majority of people on the campus are non-Muslim.
Exactly. And sometimes what happens is because the aim isn't really there, what happens is you think that the aim of ISOC is to just serve and protect the Muslims. And so what happens is, who cares about the non-Muslims? Who cares about the way they view us, and so on and so forth? And obviously there is an extent of that which is true. Like if, for example, it's not justified and so on, then like who cares? But where it is justified, where, for example, you are essentially just completely destroying the ballots and you're just getting your people in, who inshallah most of the time are suitable for the role, but sometimes they're not.
Right. And it's just because you want a Muslim face and why you purely do it.
And sometimes, wallahi, Muslims are more damaging to the ISOC than non-Muslims. Wallahi, we had a big issue. Okay, maybe I shouldn't share too much, but we had a big issue where a Muslim sabbatical officer created huge issues for the ISOC. And she wasn't really too ISOC-ly inclined, but she was endorsed by the ISOC. She was endorsed by the ISOC. And I think I spoke to you about it, isn't it? No, I spoke to Aman, I think, when it was happening, just for some guidance.
Yeah, but I was told about it.
Just for some guidance and to get some direction, because sometimes it happens. And that's very important to bear in mind. As for representation outside of student politics, for me personally, I think it's important to realize the mistakes of our predecessors. And our predecessors believed that by being politically engaged, by increasing our members, our MPs, by having Muslim faces in kind of positions of influence and positions of power, that would essentially fix us, basically. Whilst there is an element of that which is true, in the sense that there is there's
more representation.
It's important to bear in mind that that entire scene is kind of orchestrated against Islam. Like we mentioned about that notion of individual liberty, and us kind of coming at almost the complete opposite extreme. Almost like the complete opposite extreme. It's important to bear in mind that within the political scene, that is kind of what the context is like. And so pushing a lot of people into these positions, personally, I don't think it's a move in the right direction. And I think we will come to regret it, and we will see that we are creating our own monsters, because it's far easier for you to For you to say Theresa May doesn't know what she's talking about, she's not a Muslim, than for you to say Sadiq Khan, for example, doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't represent us, and this, that, the other. But he's got a brown face, he's a Muslim. And not only that, we've also got to bear in mind that there are very particular strands of Islam and forms of Islam that the government would like to propagate. And when you're entering their turf, you're entering their turf. You've got to play by their rules. You've got to play by their game. And so the Muslims who do go into that, they end up forgoing and sacrificing a lot. And they just, unfortunately, it's a very difficult scene. You put yourself into a lot of fitna. And so personally, I don't really think it's a step in the right direction, particularly in national politics. On a local level, we do have examples where it's worked brilliantly well, like Lutfur Rahman and in Tower Hamlets and so on, and like councils and so on. So I think it's important to be engaged. How engaged? I think that's a question that I'm still kind of thinking about. But I don't think the current model or the current narrative that is being propagated of 100% engagement, that this is your country, this is your democracy, and we must engage and we must be represented. I don't think that's necessarily the best narrative to take.
From my experience, obviously working in Mend and things like that, a model that I'm not saying, when in this podcast, I wasn't saying I'm speaking on behalf of men, but from things that I've learned at my time there, the kind of model that I think is quite beneficial towards Muslims is kind of looking at what the LGBT community did to get representation and what the Jewish community also did to get representation, because Jewish, that's a faith group, and the LGBT are a minority, and similarly the Muslims are a minority, right? And with the LGBT groups, in terms of to get their own representation, they were able to change public opinion so much within a short space of time that it was the policies were forced to change because public opinion changed so much about attitudes towards gay people and homosexuality and things like this, that policies just had to change, and politicians had to bend over backwards to actually enact policies that would be favorable to them. Similarly, in the case of the Jewish community, it was a much longer game, but they got to a point where they were so well organized and so well engaged with the politics that they were able to get huge representation. And now they're at a point where they can pump money into lobbying groups and they can pump money into media monitoring systems and make sure that when anything that sounds remotely anti-Semitic is flushed out. Right? So they're in such a powerful position. So following these two models, it's kind of a mixture between the two. There's trying to get Muslims engaged as much as possible so that you can get more representation and you can have influence, and also trying to change the opinion of the public so that once you do get engaged, that the people that have an influence and have power they will have to change because the public are saying so, which is kind of the crux of democracy. As long as the public have a certain opinion, the policies are going to have to change. I think that's the kind of model that we're trying to go with Muslim activism. And obviously, I think it's very premature at the moment. It's very in early stages, and we'll have to see kind of what lessons we're going to have to learn later in the future and how we're going to have to change that. And I think I agree with you, to be honest, is that it's just too early to tell, really.
Yeah,
I think that's what
I think there's a couple points there, though. From what
and also
you've
just on the point that Shaib made, I think it's also good to know that there might be a paradigm shift further down the line that might actually take us off course, and those models might not necessarily be as strong. Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of points to mention there, though, particularly with the whole LGBT and kind of those models. The first thing is to bear in mind is to realize and recognize what our aim is with engagement. If the aim is to purely protect Muslims, then obviously, that's not that difficult. It's difficult, but I mean, within the current
the model is clear.
Yeah, there's loads of examples of doing that. If the aim is to make Islam prominent within the political and social spheres, for us to say that Islam has very real solutions for the social problems within our community, that Islam has very real solutions for the political problems within our country and within our democracy. If that is the aim, then that's a completely different ball game entirely. And that's the perspective that I was coming from, basically. Not the preservation of Muslim rights, because that is what is expected from us. Do you know what I mean? Like, وَأَنَا قِيمُ الدِّينِ وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ, for you to establish the religion. And establishing the religion is something that's very important for us to try and do, because we believe it to be the best way of living. And so, because this is a democracy, because it's about trying to find what is the best way of living, you know, I think it's very important that we put Islam on that table. Having said that, though, I think there's also a couple issues with the using the Jews as a model and using LGBT as a model. I think it's very important that the kind of approach that they used was quite maqsadi in approach. Okay. That this is our aim. It doesn't matter how we'll get there. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. And as long as we do it, basically, the ends justify the means. Right. That's not the case in Islam. Right. That's not the case in Islam. Yeah. That's one point. The second thing is, we've got to bear in mind that the Muslim community is, from what I know, I don't have any statistics with me, but it's nowhere near as rich as the Jewish or the LGBT community. Nowhere near. And so that's very important to bear in mind. The third thing is, currently the way media is kind of designed, it's toxic to be Muslim. Yeah. And so what's pivotal for us to do is to create space within the media, mainstream media, for Islam's views to be heard. Yeah. And I say Islam's views and not Muslims, because Islam's views are more important. Yeah. And the government, they're very happy to push and propagate Muslims. They're very happy, for example, for the whole British Muslim paradigm to be publicly known. Yeah. Why? Because so long as you see your Britishness as being primary, right, and your Islam as being secondary, yeah, that you still fall under the nation-state model, essentially. And so therefore, you are still in complete agreement with the West. Right. And all you're doing is differing on specifics. That why are you going war there? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? What Islam says, إِنَّ هَذِهِ أُمَّتُكُمْ أُمَّةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ وَأَنَا رَبُّكُمْ فَاعْبُدُونَ. That this is one nation. That those borders, they might geographically divide you, but they don't divide you as an ummah. Yeah. That the pain that my brother feels in Syria is the pain that I feel here. And the pain that he feels in Central Africa is the pain that I feel here. Yeah. And that notion is actually very destructive to the nation-state model, because it suggests that my identity, first and foremost, is as a Muslim. Yeah. And then secondly, yeah, I'm British, because I was born here. Yeah. Do you see? Yeah. And that literally is the complete opposite of what the government wants. Mm.
And we pretty much touched on that point, yeah, in the previous episode as well. Exactly. This identity crisis. Yeah. And what comes before what? How do you think about it? Yeah. Inwardly, what are you before anything? Yeah. And I think even Sheikh Abu Ubaid mentioned this as well.
I think it's something to be human that in this moment in time is quite a common theme that we're battling with. Yeah. I think it's an interesting discussion. I think every time we have a podcast, I think it's going to be brought up, to be honest. Yeah. SubhanAllah. Yeah.
And so I think it's really just pivotal for us to bear that in mind. Yeah. And the other last thing, what we talk Jews and
the model is,
for like,
how effective is it for
progression
us? One thing activism. I wanted to, before you go on to your drop mic moment, I wanted to, is it not? This idea of alternative, not necessarily alternative media, but media from within. So you've got organisations like Islam 21C that are kind of paving the way for that, or have perhaps pioneered.
I saw that little kind of.
Or let's say ways of being able to own the narrative. That's maybe a way that I could phrase it.
The thing is, what we don't realise is we're not even on the scene.
Okay. So, we can't, what are we owning?
Even Islam 21C is great, like, don't get me wrong, but it
still has its own bubble.
It's within this.
And not only that, it's more for like conservative Muslims. It's not even like widespread within the Muslims.
So would you say we need to make a step?
And so we're not even in the scene in the first place.
We're not,
I mean, the closest thing that we have is Mehdi Hassan, maybe. Like,
it's still I wouldn't say that he's still not pushing that orthodox Islam that we're trying to get
so would you say
into a positive light.
That is also an element that we need to
Yeah, but
we can
even
solve.
then, like, how do you do that?
Yeah, that's
Do
a
you
big
want brothers
discussion.
and
Yeah.
sisters to go into that kind of
Exactly.
that
You want
world?
them to engage that far.
Yeah.
That there may be fitna for them.
Exactly,
In
and
that
this
sense.
is the thing. I think these are major questions that
These
just need
are,
to
yeah.
be
It's
thought
interesting.
about,
It's interesting.
and it can only be answered really, I think, by scholars who are brought up in this context.
Yeah, and that's why I said again, it's still early stages. Even trying to have those scholars and have them engaged in these different fields so they know it and being brought up in
This
this
is the thing.
context, it's still early.
What we need is scholars in Islam who also are scholars in social sciences. That's what's needed, and there's very few who are like that.
And I think on that point, it's important for not only for us to talk about it, but actually put our money where our mouth is and get involved in these kind of things. To be honest, this is I talk about this with loads of brothers and sisters all the time. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. But we talk about this all the time. Hey, yeah, we need to bring the golden age of Islam back when we were the top of science and the top of deen and everything. And it's like, what are you doing for it then? What are you doing for it? Yeah. Okay. Are you going to any classes? Are you going to any dars? Are you studying anything that's going to be a benefit to the ummah? Or you're just trying to be somebody who takes care of themselves and their own family and
even those who do study though, we need to start acting.
Yeah.
We study, we speak, we talk,
How
and we
many
do
of
all that
those
stuff.
have
Even
an
now,
impact?
like everything that I've said, it's just speech.
It's speech, yeah.
So where's the action? When are we actually going to, as you said, put our money where our mouth is?
It's a good way to get into the last point, actually, to round this up is...
And I think before that juncture anyway, we hope that Ibn Battuta's boat,
Yes.
as a small
Sure.
project
as a
of
small
this...
part to play in that.
Inshallah, yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
but yeah.
Allah give us tawfiq.
Yeah, I think
Ameen,
the
ya
last
Rabbi.
juncture is kind
The
of...
fourth
Billahi
point before
tawfiq.
that though,
Fourth point, okay.
I think, sorry.
You've been keeping...
It's good. It's good.
Alhamdulillah.
I'm happy to say it all day, but you know.
No, sorry, yeah, sorry. Just because we did mention it, I think personally, what Cage is doing is they're pioneering a new model. And that's a model that should be followed, where you're engaging with politics, you're engaging with mainstream discussions, you're putting out your narrative within the media, but at the same time, you're not immediately involved in them. And I think that is maybe a better way of influencing social discourse and social, and just generally the political kind of, the politics within
So
our
in
society.
summary-
Not that I would disagree with
Yeah.
you. I think that is a good point, but I don't think still it's the best.
Okay.
I still don't think it's the best. Because the way that I see it is that it's very much I'm on the sidelines kind of thing.
That's
because
true.
You're
That's
not
true.
being taken
Yeah.
seriously
That's
enough.
true. Yeah.
You can say what you want, but you're still kept on the sidelines.
That's true.
And again, I think it goes back to the point that it's just too early to tell.
That's true. So I think, yeah, that's true. Fair enough.
Yeah, sorry.
So I guess in wrapping up with that
Yeah.
point anyway, what would you say are the telltale signs of moving on from this kind of idea of primary to secondary?
Yeah.
Ownership, being part of the conversation, being there, but knowing that you stand for certain things, yani Islam, and you're able to own the narrative. You're able to take control of your own narrative. It's not being borrowed, it's not being...
So I think that's established. I think the question is how to do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's
That's the
more
main
it's how
question.
do we do it, yeah.
I think that question it ties back to what we first talked about. I opened it with, what are the top 3 things that you'll take away from your time in activism? And I think it kind of comes back to that point. Where do you think, what do you think life is beyond kind of that, those things you learned from ISOC? How do you take that forward and actually impact it into the ummah? Because this is what I've said to brothers and sisters all the time that join ISOC. ISOC's only the beginning of the journey. A lot of people think it's the end, it's the be all and end all. Wow, I made it to be a president, a head sister, now I've done my activism. But I think it's the beginning of the journey. So where do you kind of see taking that and bringing it ahead and actually having an impact in the ummah?
So within the individuals?
For either
For people that are
for
involved in ISOC.
individuals
Okay, for
that have
people who are
gone
involved.
through activism are going to continue it, or for even organizations like ISOC, like FOSIS, like MEND, of trying to further that activism and see the future of the Muslims here.
Maybe I'll just focus on the individuals.
Individuals, okay,
Because,
You don't want to
organizing-
speak for...
yeah,
Organisations.
and the organisations, I don't think they listen to me anyway. If I'm completely frank. But I think it's very important for our brothers and sisters, as you said, to realise that this is the beginning of the journey. A lot of people, they see it as the end. And you even find it within the narrative that, oh, when I start working or when I get married and this, that, the other, my life's over and this, that. The Sahaba never thought like that. The Sahaba, they never ever thought like that. They saw, yeah, we got married, yeah, we did this, yeah, we did all of that. But these are the side things in life. My life is all about that struggle for Allah.
Yeah.
No.
For Allah and for the deen and so on and so forth. And in our lives, the way we see it is that the struggle, the volunteering, the activism is on the side. The activism is on the side. And I'm going to do it in my spare time. It's something that I'm giving additional. And I think this was a point that I was going to mention earlier. There's a degree of activism that is wajib, that you must have.
Yeah.
No.
And there's a degree of ilm that is wajib.
Yeah.
And so if you're going a huge amount into the ilm that is mustahab and so on and so forth, and you haven't done the wajib of the activism,
Yeah.
there's
It's
an issue
obligatory
there.
upon you.
There's an issue there. That this country, we don't need more academics. We've got loads of academics. What we need are people who know the deen, but at the same time, they've gone through various experiences that have given them strong character, strong determination to deal with the storms that we were talking about, to deal with the media issue, to deal with the political issues, to deal with the social issues, to deal with the oppression that they will 100% get if they were to start talking about Islam as being the source of the solutions.
And is that something that's established in the deen to do that and to be that kind of person? Like, I know,
course.
I'm
That's a no-brainer.
I'm not asking that for myself, but I'm just asking that to clarify.
ولتكن منكم أمة يدعون إلى الخير ويأمرون بالمعروف وينهون عن المنكر وأولئك هم المفلحون. ولتكن, let there be, command, and the command shows wujub. It shows that it must be the case, that there must be at least a group. A group. So it's not, I'm not saying that it's wajib upon every single individual, but there must be a group of us. منكم أمة يدعون إلى الخير. They do da'wah to al-khair. And the greatest good is Islam. وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, and they command the good and they forbid the evil. وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ, and those people are the successful people. Ameen, ameen. And so it's very important that we bear in mind that this is a command upon the ummah. And as the scholars of Islam say, if that objective is not fulfilled, if that command of Allah is not fulfilled, then it becomes obligatory upon every single one of us. That whilst this is a communal obligation, communal obligations, fara'id, which are kifaya, if they're like that, if it's not being fulfilled, then it becomes fard ayn. All of us have to do it. And without doubt, I think it's very clear for us to say that we are not doing enough. The da'wah within this country, it's not really, the message isn't hitting home. The message is not hitting home. And so it's pivotal upon us for us to realize that this is something that Allah wants from us. And it's very easy for us to study. It's very easy for us to read books. It's fun. But if we can't even do that, how on earth are we going to have the discipline and the sabr to go through the challenges that life will bring us? If we can't even have sabr over setting up the chairs and organizing the speakers and the tiny issues that we deal with in SU, the pressures that we face there, feeling victimized within our own kind of communities, if we can't be strong in those moments, what about the actual world? You know? Because that's, if you think about ISOC and all of these things as like a training ground, which is the way we should think about it, as a tarbiyyah, part of our tarbiyyah process, because it's very important that we realize that tarbiyyah isn't just ilm, it's not just studying, it's also ISOC, it's also being involved in projects, it's also character development. If we don't get involved in these things, then what will naturally happen is if we were to even try to step into the limelight and speak the truth, we will be massacred. We will be massacred. And if we don't step forward, that if we turn back, then Allah Azza wa Jal will come with the people. He loves them and they love Him. We're talking about being soft with the believers. Being soft with the believers. They're soft. They're loving. They take care of them. They're thinking about their needs. And they are harsh against disbelief. And it's very important that we're very critical of our country, of our society, of the things and the horrors that are occurring within our country. يُجَاهِدُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, and they're striving in the path of Allah. And like we mentioned, jihad is a comprehensive term. It's not just fighting, and particularly in the West, the jihad, the intellectual jihad is pivotal. Creating the space for Islam to be shown as the source of solutions is pivotal. For us to be able to speak the truth is pivotal. And that is probably the jihad of the West. particularly in London and the UK. يجاهدون في سبيل الله ولا يخافون لومة لائم. And they don't fear any name calling. They're not afraid of men being called an extremist organization or apologists for terror and these things, because these are all just names. So you can call me what you want. You can call me an extremist if that's what you're saying. Like, what does that matter? We're so afraid of being labeled a radical or an extremist that we forget as to how we're labeled with Allah. And how does Allah label people? There's three groups. There's the mu'mineen, there's the munafiqeen, and there's the kafirin. And if we're giving precedence to the disbelievers, if we're thinking about them and how they think about us more than they're thinking about Allah, then what about our iman? Honestly. And again, this is just speech. I've never suffered from any of these things. I've never gone through any of those difficulties. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give us strength and to give us the ability to be the people who are used rather than those who are replaced with the better people. Because if we do return, Wallahu al-ghani wa antum fuqara. Allah is rich and you are all poor, and we are poor, and we should ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give us the strength to deal with these challenges, because if we are able to deal with these challenges, then perhaps we'd be like those people who the Prophet ﷺ said, in the end of times there will be people who are worth 50. And they asked, 50 of who? 50 of them or 50 of us? 50 of the Sahaba. 50 of the Sahaba. Imagine that. Imagine the strength of character, the strength of iman, how involved they were within the communities. How involved they were within the communities. And so activism is pivotal to that. Tarbiyyah, studying, is pivotal to that. But most importantly, character is pivotal to that. And from both of those you get character. Strong character, courage, compassion, love, justice. All of these traits that are huge, that the Sahaba embodied, we also need to start living and start embodying. Wabillahi tawfiq.
Jazakallah khair, Abdus Samad. Alhamdulillah. Perfect ending.
No.
I think we'll leave it there and just remind the
Barakallahu
listeners, inshallah, to visit the website ibnbattutasboat.com where you can stream the episode, download the episode. We've got a SoundCloud, Ibn Battutas Boat, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram are all the same, inshallah. So make sure you're following them, you're sharing it. And last but not least, a big shout out to Huda Television. You can find them on all social medias as well, Huda Television or Huda TV. And they have given us this studio space to be able to record, alhamdulillah. And so we're very appreciative to them. So please do check them out. They have lots of live streaming on Facebook and YouTube of lots of different beneficial shows and programs. Barakallahu feek. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
تقل قد ذهبت أربابه كل من سار على الدرب وصل في ازدياد العلم إرغام العند